criteria. We're going to talk about some relevance of this to you because I feel like it's important that you can look at it through the lens of, is this going to be relevant to my needs as a practitioner? Then we're going to be talking about the 4 parts of applied behavior analysis that are very important to this theory, and really what we're talking about is setting antecedents, behaviors, and consequences. We're going to talk about how to determine a function of a behavior based on your SABCs. From there, we're going to determine how to produce a hypothesis statement. We're going to practice that and show mastery. We're going to then go into how you use a hypothesis statement to set up a treatment plan or an intervention plan for a client. Again, we'll be modeling that. And then lastly, we will review our learning outcomes and see how they've been met. So as far as our learning outcomes go, we have 3. Number 1, you've already done that to a large extent. So being able to talk about theoretically what applied behavior analysis is, and how, historically its treatment applications. And so that was your homework assignment, and we kind of scanned through those, and it looks like you have a pretty good grasp on, at least theoretically, what's going on. Secondly, we have our, I want you guys to go deeper. I want you to be able today to actually apply applied behavior analysis to an authentic situation or client that you may have had in the past. And finally, I'm not going to try and convince you that you have to use applied behavior analysis, but at the end, I want you to look at this and really think about whether that's something that's viable or not. I want you to take a stance on that, have a claim as to whether you believe it is useful, and I want you to be able to use research to defend your claim and be able to back that up. So more than just an opinion, and that'll be really your homework assignment for a week out. But we'll get to that in a minute. So let's go ahead and really talk about relevance of applied behavior analysis. And really, historically, applied behavior analysis is very much thought of as being used with clients with autism or clients on the autism spectrum disorder. It's also been used for behaviors, very behavior oriented. So before I get into that, as you know, we've just covered cognitive behavior analysis, also a behavioral approach, but there's some definite differences, and there's definitely relevance, and there's a lot of research that backs cognitive behavior analysis as a very viable tool for mental health intervention. So if we remember correctly, cognitive behavioral therapy is very much based on cognitive distortions, and the idea that cognitive distortions are the root to all mental health issues. And basically your thoughts impact your emotions, which impact your behaviors. What's different about applied behavior analysis is the fact that we're looking deeper. We're looking at more specific, actually, at the behaviors, breaking down the reasons for those behaviors and addressing the behavior based on that analysis. There's not a lot, we're not going to be talking about emotions or thoughts too much, because That's not what applied behavior analysis is really about. In my history, I've worked as a behavior specialist for 16 years in the school systems before going into administrative positions. And so I have a lot of experience using applied behavior analysis, a lot of it with students on the autism spectrum. And there it's very well established that that is a good model for that group of people. However, we've also used it a lot for behavior disorders, emotional disorders, and I did have some experience with mental health disorders where applied behavior analysis was very successful. I think it's a valuable tool. I don't believe it's good for every situation, but it's a good lens to have even when you're using other theories. And it helps in really analyzing and understanding a behavior and how to approach that. So what I want you to do right now is take a minute. I want you to think about, from what you know about applied behavior analysis, take a minute to think about how relevant that is to your practice. And you may have already thought about a lot of that coming in to class, doing your assignment. And then I'm going to have you pair with a partner to provide some back and forth with each other. So let's go ahead and get started. You have a minute. Let's think about it. 2 minutes, pair and share. Okay, thank you. It was very informative. I really enjoyed the discussions that I saw, especially those that have actually used that before, which is very helpful. Let's go ahead and start talking about how to determine a function of a behavior. And really, we're looking in applied behavior analysis to 4 parts. And it goes SABC. Behavior is really your main thing. That's what you're going to focus on. So generally you're going to focus on maybe 1 to 3 actual behaviors. You're going to look for the most relevant behaviors that are causing problems. And based on that, you're going to talk about if there's a common setting that those behaviors occur. You'll record the settings that occurs. You're going to look at the antecedent, which is not what the client does, but it's an event that occurs to the client, and it could be what another person does in the family, another person in somewhere in the client's life does, or it's an event that occurs that can create or that can precede that behavior. Then, of course, what is that behavior, which we're talking about maladaptive behaviors, doing once you've done it? What do you get out of it? I mean, there's a reason for every behavior, right? If you're a behaviorist. So anything you're doing, you want something out of it. And what are you getting out of that? So those are important factors to keep in mind. So let's go ahead and look at antecedent. We already talked about that. What situation or demands, activities set off the problem behavior. You could think about them as triggers almost, is a good way of thinking about it. And then, of course, as I described with consequence data, you're looking at what events immediately follow the occurrence of the problem behavior. What does the student get or avoid by this behavior? So as we look at analyzing data, we have our SABCs, remember, setting, antecedent, behavior, consequences, as you break down events. And what this can look like is sitting with a client and the client remembering scenarios of things where this problem behavior occurred. Okay, so you'll talk about what setting he was in, you'll talk about what happened right before that behavior or what triggered that, and it could be a few things, what the actual behavior was, and what he got out of it. What was the consequence? What did he gain from using that behavior? The other way is, that I think is good, is maybe families working together and being able, if it's a safe environment, being able to talk about that behavior with the client, and the family looking at these and going through. The key is not to just have one. You want to get a pattern. Okay, so if you can get a few scenarios to look at kind of the same pattern went through as far as the behavior, that's very helpful. Because what we want to do ultimately is determine the function of the behavior. And a function of a behavior in applied behavior analysis, they want to know what the client wanted to gain from doing that behavior, or what they wanted to avoid by doing that behavior. So basically some examples of what somebody might want to gain by doing a certain behavior would be stimulation, tangibles, compliance, attention, activity, revenge, control, even energy, and things to avoid that behavior. So people avoid certain things, these things, by doing that behavior, and that would be stimulation, certain tasks, activities, compliance, interactions, pain, shame, conflict. There are so many, so you could go on forever. I just picked a few that might be relevant pretty often. So more clarity on this. So as far as functions of behavior, I yell because others fear me. I cut myself because it calms me. I fight because others obey me. I drink because it makes me brave. I scream at others to gain relief. And then some examples of escape or avoidance would be, I take heroin to avoid the emotional pain. I break things so that my parents will leave me alone. I kick others so they will move away from me. I sleep to avoid stress. So really we're talking about the maladaptive behaviors like yelling, cutting, fighting, drinking, screaming. And then we're looking at the function, which is either to gain something or to avoid something. And then we're looking at what the function is, which is what they want is fear or control. What they want is to be calmed down, obey, compliance, etc. Okay, let's do a check for understanding. And basically what I want is thumbs up, you've got it so far. In between, kind of, and down, you don't. Okay, so we're all on track right now. And let's move on. So next once we have a function, and basically we've broken down and we've seen patterns of setting. We see a certain behavior occur. We see what happened right before that behavior. And then we see the consequence of that behavior that the person was seeking. Here's a little phrase, template that can be used. So when, and you're going to put your antecedent or trigger and setting, the person's name will, what the behavior is in order to gain, avoid what. Okay, there's your function. So some examples: when confronted about his drinking, Jamie will become verbally and physically aggressive towards his wife in order to avoid sobriety. When involved in an argument with her spouse, Brenda will cut herself in order to gain emotional relief. At home, when conflict arises with her parents, Tina runs away in order to avoid confrontation. Okay, so you can see how that's been broken up. There's a reason it's called a hypothesis statement, because you're making the best guess from the data you have, and you may be wrong. And if you're wrong, you're going to have to come back and say, "Well, that hypothesis was not on target. We need to relook at this." So there's what you're dealing with that. Let's get into. So you have a hypothesis statement, which is going to tell you when and where and what the person is avoiding or trying to gain, and what kind of that maladaptive behavior. That's really nice to kind of see that. However, we need to start thinking about how to address that. And so it's going to be different for every client. You're not going to be able to say every person that cuts themselves might be able to talk to somebody, because talking may not have the same effect for one person as another person. So you're really looking for a replacement behavior that can meet the same needs as the maladaptive behavior. So when we look at this, and I've put this down there, you try and find a replacement behavior that will fulfill the same function of the target behavior. Okay, we call it maladaptive. In behavior, we call it target behavior, and we're looking for a replacement behavior. Okay, so the maladaptive or target behaviors here are cuts self, runs away, drinks alcohol. Okay, we also have the function added on to there to gain relief, to avoid confrontation, to avoid anxiety. So when we talk about replacement behaviors, we want to replace those target behaviors with something that's going to give the same function as the maladaptive or target behaviors. So a possibility for a client might be talking to an older sister. And that takes working with that client to really understand really what is going to help to replace that cutting behavior. What gives you kind of the same relief that you might get. And you also have to be honest that, a replacement behavior for drug use, it's very hard to compete with what a drug can do for you. However, but you got to be honest about it. This isn't going to be a perfect replacement. It's going to be hard. However, this is something that will help alleviate this, and will work towards recovery. So we talked about a talking plan for the cutting. We talked about, in this one, we have somebody who runs away to avoid confrontation. Instead of running away, maybe he or she can write in a journal to communicate without having to have that confrontation. It's not perfect. We want people to be able to advocate and be assertive and express their needs without running away. However, this is a good step towards that versus a very maladaptive behavior. Drinks alcohol to avoid anxiety. This client may really have a lot of anxiety. It could be social anxiety, or it could be something else. And the use of self-talk is something that has been positive and can be practiced and used. So when we have those anxiety situations, instead of drinking, using self-talk. Okay, we're going to do a check for understanding. This is really breaking down everything, applying pretty much everything that I've talked about up to this point. So you are all professionals. You've worked with many clients, and you're adults, and I want you to take from your experience and be able to have a scenario that you can quickly just fill this in. I want you to be able to state what the setting is, that the maladaptive behavior occurs for one of your clients, the target or maladaptive behavior, the antecedent that you believe there was a pattern of with this client, And then what did that client get out of the maladaptive behavior? Okay. From that, I'd like you to provide a function of that behavior. And then at the end of that, produce a hypothesis statement from your function and that information. And then, of course, I would like for you to come up with your replacement behavior for that target behavior. Okay, so let's take about 10 minutes, and I'm going to be walking around the room, and you can ask me some questions, but really I want to see that you know how to take authentic situations and apply it to this model. Okay, thank you. You guys did an excellent job. Nice work. I'm confident you know what's going on, and I think we were able to clarify some things, and I feel like you have a good grasp. But let's do a check for understanding. Again, I got this, kind of, and no, I know I need help with this. Excellent. That's what I thought by looking at your responses. I do believe you guys have mastery over this part. Okay, so the whole point of this is to figure out how to address the behavior, right? So really there's 4 prongs that we use in our intervention or our treatment. The first prong is environmental strategies. Second is antecedent strategies. Third is teaching strategies. And then finally, reinforcement strategies. And let me give you a little brief overview. Environmental strategies, these are things that you're doing, putting in place, that don't change the person. Okay, you're changing the environment to minimize that behavior occurring. All right, so it's schedules, it's a variety of things that make your environment less likely to create the behavior in place. Antecedent strategies, this is more around basically, and a client himself can be aware of antecedents that occur, but really the client doesn't produce antecedents. So this is in a family therapy or a spousal type situation. The other supporters of this client would be using these antecedent strategies to support the client. Teaching strategies, that's going to be a lot of what you as a therapist or a counselor are going to teach or provide to this client for them to be successful. Okay, so that could be a range of things that we can talk about some examples of. Reinforcement strategies, this is the one that I'm not as a big, it's one that can be kind of insulting. So you got to be careful. You don't want to make somebody feel like you're minimizing them as their ability to handle things by giving them something to be successful. And it's different for every case. I mean, so definitely a child, reinforcement strategies are very applicable, as well as maybe a developmental, concrete thinking client. However, an adult is not going to be very favorable to that. So we'll talk about some of those examples too. Let's talk about some environmental strategies. It can be things like lighting or noise volume or sensory type things that really maybe don't trigger it, but people can be very sensitive to certain stimulus that can create more anxiety, that can have their tolerance for frustration go way down. So those are things to be aware of. Some people need to create more structure in their lives, which as far as schedules to help them. Removing access to certain people in their lives can really help them not have that behavior occur. Okay, so it could be It could be an adolescent that has certain types of friends that maybe that is an environmental strategy. Maybe you shouldn't be around those folks, okay? It can be a whole lot of, it could be a certain extended family member that really creates issues that make that behavior more likely. It could be a nutrition issue. It could be removing certain substances from the home. You could, like energy drinks, so the person's not sleeping and the person then their tolerance is low again for frustration, and that behavior is more likely. It could be an issue with pornography. It could actually be alcohol or drugs in the home and making sure that those aren't around. Knives or blades. This could be, well, you might say, hey, but if they want a knife or blade, they can get it. True. But just like alcohol and drugs, if it is handy or if it's available immediately, that makes a big difference versus having to go and seek that out. It's possible, definitely, and sometimes likely that they will seek that out, but let's not have it in the home because it makes the chance of that behavior occurring much higher. Like with knives, if you have homicidal ideation, suicidal ideation, or cutting, not having those around is helpful. Scheduling things like sleep, meals, meditation or prayer, and then also exercise can be also great environmental strategies. As far as reinforcement strategies, we already talked about this. So we have extinction plans. An extinction plan is great for a younger child. However, it can also be for somebody who is helping to enable a behavior. So an extinction plan is a good way of understanding it would be, so if you want to get rid of me saying hello, for instance, when I say hello to you, you ignore me. And then basically I'll say it a little louder and you continue to ignore me till I'm in your face almost screaming it and you still ignore me. At some point I'm going to give up saying hello to you because it's not effective anymore. It's the same thing with extinction. If you have a behavior that is not being validated or is being ignored, it's going to get worse before it gets better. You're going to elevate it to get the same effect, but if at some point it'll peak and stop using that behavior because you're not going to get what you need. You know, that could be providing money for a drug problem. That could be just kind of an abusive situations, being able to give attention for certain types of behaviors. And we all know those codependent type relationships where that might be applicable to, or folks that help. They're trying to help, but they're actually increasing the likelihood of that behavior. A response cost would be a child. It's actually a punishment. Personal contingency contract. That could be between everybody, and it's not going to change the behavior. Behaviorists often think there's a price for everything. Everybody has a price, every behavior. It's more, more around just being an animal that you give them something to do something. There's more of an intrinsic part in humans as far as they want to change for the most part, and we are helping them identify this behavior and helping them change. Reinforcement can help naturally by seeing the fruits of what they're doing and the relationships that are coming about, and they can keep a job, or their spouses and them are more happy because of that behavior going away. That's a natural reinforcement. You can set up and even with the self can set up, hey, if I can do this for this many months and not have this behavior, I'm going to treat myself to something. But younger clients, less developed clients, you can definitely put something in place. Tokens like they use in AA to that represent doing a really good job, and sticking it out for so long can be very effective as a reinforcement. And then for younger students, reinforcement schedules are effective also. Antecedent strategies. If you're a spouse of somebody who's got something going on, or a family member, and the family is working on providing antecedent strategies to support somebody else in their family or somebody they are supporting. Sometimes it's versus just telling somebody to do something, giving them some choices that can help somebody who has control needs. Sometimes if you're seeing that person's upset, an antecedent strategy might be, I'm not going to push this right now because that will increase the chance of this behavior occurring. I'm going to give it some time before we address this. Body language, how you are presenting what you want the person to do, or your expectations, or how you're communicating and what that looks like to the other person. You may need to change some of your body language. Zone of influence, I statements are good. And then of course relationship strategies, teaching family members and partners on how to build relationships, so the person, when you do interact with them, is not thinking you're coming at them in a negative way, that there's enough positive things that have happened and enough foundation that it's not seen as a threat as much as a support. Some teaching strategies. This is a lot of stuff you're going to teach a client. So desensitization might be something, meditation, teaching mindfulness. You may provide some scripts for in the moment issues, as far as somebody who deals with peer pressure to use drugs. You might give them a script that, oh, I'm being drug tested, I can't do this right now, kind of an out. Or a script when instead of doing something maladaptive to gain attention, there's another way they can do that. Or handling conflicts, instead of sliding into this maladaptive, breaking things, aggression, saying things you don't mean. Give them a script they can use to handle it right then, and maybe even another strategy to help them calm. Self-talk is a very powerful tool that can be used, can be taught. Perspective taking, calming strategies, and DTT. It's endless. And all kinds of therapies that can be provided and incorporated in here also. Okay, let's check for understanding again. What I want you to do is, so we've talked about when we had our your authentic situation. Now what I'm wanting you to do is actually take it a step further. I want you to be able to put a intervention or treatment plan in place based on that. So I want you to get a page. You got a blank page on your table there, and really I want you to break it into 4 parts. So your page, you'll have a line going down this way, a line across. You're going to put your hypothesis statement down at the bottom here. And I want you to label environmental, teaching, antecedent, and reinforce. I really just need, based on that last client that you looked at and that experience you've had, and you came up with a hypothesis statement and replacement behavior for that client, let's look at how you can punish the target behavior or eliminate the target behavior and increase the replacement behavior. So all of these things should be increasing good behavior, decreasing that particular maladaptive behavior. So you're going to have a couple in each of you, 2 to 3, and that apply directly to your client that you worked on earlier with the function. So let's take about 8 minutes on that. Thank you. Okay. All right, so you guys did a great job. Again, I feel like you've really mastered this in a short time. Your responses were spot on. I feel like they correlated very well with your hypothesis statements and created a well-rounded ABA plan for a client. So let's talk about your homework real quick. And I mentioned that that's going to be your learning outcome number 3. At this point, you may or may not feel that ABA has a place in your practice, and that's okay. I think it's important to know this terminology regardless. Or you may feel like, absolutely, I can see where I use this, or I already use this. What I want you to do is, I need a paper that will, and I'm not giving you a length of the paper, I just need to be clear and very defensible. So you are going to have a claim. You're going to claim either for ABA in your practice or against ABA. And I know there's people that don't agree with this. And I know people that really use this strategy. So I need at least three citations defending, that help you defend your claim. So that's your homework, and that'll be a week out from today. But I would like to reflect on our learning outcomes before we end here. So firstly, students will be able to describe applied behavior analysis and its treatment applications. Absolutely. You guys modeled that with your assignments that came in, and then just your work you did. I feel like you have a good grasp on that. Students will be able to describe and apply the specific steps and methodology of applied behavior analysis. You absolutely applied it. You took real life situations, you built your data, you looked at your setting antecedents, behaviors, and consequences. From that, I saw you develop a function, I saw you develop a hypothesis statement, I saw you develop a replacement behavior. And then from there, I saw you developed a treatment plan with your 4 prongs, your teaching strategies, your reinforcement strategies, your environmental strategies, and antecedent strategies. So I saw you do that. You did a great job. So I feel strongly that you guys have grasped this learning outcome. And then finally, this will be determined at the end when I receive your other papers. And I want to see you be able to have your claim and be able to defend that appropriately. All right, thank you very much, and have a good rest of your day.